Good evening, viewers. Welcome to our special program on Guyana's oil and gas sector. I am your hostess for tonight, Kiana Wilberg. In our midst this evening is the Minister of Natural Resources, the Honorable Vickram Bharrat. Minister, welcome to our
Thank you,
program.
Kiana. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Minister, as we mark the 4 year anniversary of the People's Progressive Party government, we have a unique opportunity before us to reflect on some of the challenges as well as the achievements of your administration as it pertains to the oil and gas industry. So, we have a number of issues, as you would imagine, to cover under such an important industry. So, let's get started. To kickstart our conversation, can you take us through some of the challenges that you encountered when you were appointed minister in August of 2020?
Thank you, Kiana. And again, let me say that I'm happy to be here to discuss this very important sector as we celebrate 4 years. I can't believe it's already 4 years because we've been so caught up with building out the sector and developing a new Guyana that we all want to see, that we all yearn for years now. We're seeing that new Guyana evolving in front of our very eyes. So that is something that all Guyanese are pleased of. With regards to the oil and gas sector, I must say before I come directly to the question, I must say that over the last 4 years, a lot has been done in developing this new sector. The pace at which the oil and gas sector has developed over the last 4 years is really unprecedented. We have not seen this kind of development or pace of development in an oil and gas sector in any part of the world. Unfortunately, when we took over in 2020, the readiness for forest oil wasn't there, other than the chants and the lip service and the news item and the commentary and the boasting and bragging in parliament by the then government about forest oil. Much wasn't done in terms of building out that framework to manage this important sector, as you would imagine. This is a sector that, if it is not managed properly, it can become a curse to our country and many other countries, and we have seen that around the world. It's not how much you have, it's how well you manage it, and to ensure that the benefits derived from it reaches the ordinary Guyanese. So we were quite taken back that nothing much was done in terms of building out that framework that is needed to manage the sector in a transparent and accountable manner. For example, we had a 1986 Exploration and Production Act that was being used to manage the sector. We knew that we had oil. Oil was discovered in May of 2015. So we had 4 years preparing for forest oil in December of 2019. And in those 4 years, we were very surprised that nothing was done. The whole act was not amended. We had no work being done on modernizing the legislative framework to manage the sector. There was no local content legislation in place. There was a policy that was hardly announced or revealed in January of 2020, 2 months before the election. And if you read that local content policy, it's not really a local content policy. It's more in favor of foreign companies, I must say, sadly. The Natural Resources Fund Act, as you know, was passed, I think it was May of 2019. And the nation will know that that was after the no confidence motion. The no confidence motion, I was a parliamentarian then too. So if I can recall clearly, the date was the 24th of December 2018. That was the night on which that no confidence motion was passed in the National Assembly against the APNU AFC government. And our law, and I think this was ventilated a lot, that once there's a successful passage of a no confidence motion, it simply means that the government has fallen and elections must be held in 90 days. So we recognized that. We were preparing for election, and we said that going to parliament now makes no sense. The government is illegal. So because of that, we were not present in the National Assembly when the APNU AFC, being an illegal government at that time, took a natural resources fund bill to the parliament and had it passed in the National Assembly. However, that natural resources fund bill had many loopholes and areas in which it was not clear as to how funds will flow out of this fund, who will manage it, how will the populace and anyone wanting to know how much funds go into that account, it was not quite clear. The Minister of Finance had all the powers to determine how much money flows into the national budget, when it flows into the national budget. There was this big unit being set up to manage the fund. So it was not realistic. It was not realistic. And we were not there in Parliament, as I mentioned too. Besides from that, we had 4 years preparing for forest oil. I can't recall much training being done. I can't recall the government working and setting up an institute like we are at the Port Moran Training Center in Borbies to train young Guyanese so that they can be employed directly in the oil and gas sector. I can't recall students from Guyana going on scholarship to do petroleum engineering or reservoir engineering or being certified or trained to work in the sector. I recall too that these very supply boats that are coming to Guyana today for supplies, they were going to Trinidad or they were going to Houston. And remember at all times that we are paying half of this cost. Today it takes a supply boat 12 hours or a little less from the Stabroek block to Port Georgetown. Against that, it takes the supply boat, the very supply boat, 24 hours from the Stabroek block to Port of Spain. So it simply means more traveling time, which obviously translates into cost. And you'll be surprised to know that many of our products, many Guyanese products, especially from the agriculture sector, was being shipped to Trinidad and sold to those very supply boats that comes back right back into offshore Guyana. That was what was taking place in 2020. When we took over in 2022, sadly, we had about, I think it's about $200-300 million in investment being held up because of some permit, because of some agency not doing what they're supposed to do. They were basically dragging their feet in terms of permitting these companies that are investing. I can recall clearly Saipem being one of the most important company here being held up, the investment being held up almost or over 100 million US dollars. So that is what we inherited in August of 2020. Bear in mind, it was just a few months that we started producing oil in December of 2019. So we had that hard task of basically building out this framework to manage the sector. We had a hard task to ensure that we bring additional benefits to Guyanese because we made it clear from the onset, even before we in the 2020 election, that we are not in favor of renegotiating the Stabroek contract, even though we are not too pleased about it. We made it clear that we're not going to renegotiate it, but we are going to ensure that there is better contract administration and management, and we are going to ensure that we work towards bringing additional benefits, whether it's through the gas, as in the gas energy project, which we will talk a little more about, or through direct employment of our people, training our people to work in the oil and gas sector. So we started that task as soon as we took government. You would recall too that when we took government, the APNU AFC was in negotiation and the process of approving the Payara project. So we took over that. When we took over that, in I would say in 2 months, or we had 2 months to review the FDP, do a total review of the FDP, bring in our consultants and specialists to do a review of it, and to ensure that the license that was issued for Payara was an advancement from the Lisa license, and that it is structured in a way to protect our environment and to bring bring additional benefits to Guyana. So we had that task of approving the Payara license just months, in a matter of 2 months taking office. So these were some of the things that we inherited, And these were some of the early tasks that we had to embark on in 2020.
Minister Bharrat, that was indeed a comprehensive overview of some of the challenges that you faced. I'm sure that that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. Those were just some of the main issues that the PPP government faced. And as you noted, some of the tasks that the government was required to do to fix some of these issues, such as revamping the legislative and regulatory framework and strengthening some of the permits. I want to turn your attention, if you may, to some of the key improvements within the oil and gas industry that, in your view, have made it modernized and in keeping with that world class principle.
Okay, so Kian, let me start with the Petroleum Activities Act.
Sure.
I think that is critical because if you're managing an oil and gas sector in 2024, you cannot do so with a 1986 Act, as you would imagine. So we had to rework, or we had to basically have a new act in place to ensure that it can manage a 2024 oil and gas sector, that it relates to activities that are occurring today and not in 1986. So I think that was the one major achievement of our administration, especially in the oil and gas sector, because you cannot manage a sector if you don't have proper legislation in place, updated modern legislation in place. Because if now the world is speaking about the conversation around is carbon capture, utilization, and storage,
Yes.
in the 1986 Act, there was no provision for that. Today, if Exxon or any other company wishes to do carbon capture and storage offshore Guyana, we have an act that caters for that. That we can actually issue a geological permit or geophysical permit so that we can do carbon capture and storage in Guyana here. And that by itself is an achievement for any country, any oil and gas country. The decommissioning of projects, because projects will come to an end. There's a time frame for each project. It won't last forever. But how do we deal with that at the end of life of a project? What happens then? Who's responsible for it? Where will the funds come from to do the decommissioning, to carry out the decommissioning? That now is in this new act where it speaks to a decommissioning fund being set up for each project, and to ensure that this fund is properly managed and there is sufficient revenue in that fund to ensure that the end of life, whichever company is engaged in the production or the operation of that field, that they are responsible and they have the enough resources in that fund to decommission the project. That is also in there. Storage of gas through pipeline. We are working on the Wales gas energy project. The 1986 Act, there was nothing with relation to transportation of gas, whether it's by truck or whether it's by pipeline. We have included that in this new act now. There are also measures and penalties, I must say, to ensure that companies adhere to their work program that is approved by us. Because every company would have to submit a work program to us, which we approve, but we have to hold them accountable to ensure that this work program is carried out. If you say you're going to drill a well in 2024, we expect you to drill a well in 2024, and not for it to be deferred 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So in other words, we don't want operators or companies just holding on to these blocks without much activities, because it is through these exploration activities that opportunities are generated onshore for Guyanese and Guyanese businesses, and it creates employment at the same time. If there is no activity, then there is no opportunity or jobs created. So these are some of the advancements that are in the Petroleum Activities Act of 2023. There are much more, of course, to ensure that we manage the sector in an efficient manner, so that operators are held accountable to, that when discoveries are made, that the government is notified. We are notified if there is a potential commerciality to any projects too, which by law we must be notified of. So all these are included in the Petroleum Activities Act of 2023 now. So I would say it is a very modern act. for a new oil producing country, maybe one of the newest oil producing country in the world, I think there's a very advanced act to manage this sector. And I think that's a big accomplishment for us. Again, on the legislative side, I spoke earlier about the Natural Resources Fund.
Mm-hmm.
You would recall that in 2021, December of 2021, I think it was the 29th of December when we had that big ruckus in Parliament, when the opposition tried to block the passage of the new Natural Resources Fund bill.
Mm-hmm.
Blocking the passage of a new Natural Resources Fund bill that speaks to proper accountability, proper oversight. It's ridiculous from an opposition that you would want to block the passage of such an important bill when it strengthens the one that you passed when you were illegal in government, when it proves more accountability and transparency. It gives more transparency and accountability to revenue flowing into the natural resources fund and outflows as well too. Because for example, today with our natural resources fund act in place, it means that anyone, any Guyanese, anyone around the world can actually go online and you can see every single inflow from oil revenue, be it the sale of Guyana, government of Guyana crude or royalties coming into that fund, because it is gazetted by the Minister of the Minister of Finance. It is gazetted. The minister reports, has a responsibility to report to the National Assembly on a quarterly basis. And only recently the report was tabled in Parliament. The Natural Resources Committee tabled that report. So anyone can see the amount of money that flows into that account from oil revenue. And we know that there is only two ways in which money flows out of that fund. One is by way of the national budget, which everyone knows. The budget is very public. We debated for an entire week. We have another week for the opposition to question the government on spendings, how we are going to spend it. And then there is mechanism to ensure that there is scrutiny after that too. In terms of spending, there is the Auditor General, there is the Public Accounts Committee. They scrutinize spending. So that's one way in which money flows out from the Natural Resources Fund into the national budget, which is passed by the National Assembly or must be approved by the National Assembly. So everyone knows how much money flows into the national budget from that fund. Then the other way is if there's a national disaster. Um, God forgive if we have a tsunami, or because one person said that we can have tsunami, I'm not sure. If we have a tsunami, if we have earthquake, if we have flooding of great magnitude, then we can utilize money from that fund to assist our people, to restore them to their former state, to help them. And again, that must be approved by the National Assembly. So there is enough safeguard in this new act to ensure that there is proper transparency and accountability of oil revenue. And it has proven well, it has worked well from 2022 onwards. And I think everyone is satisfied that there is proper accountability of funds flowing through that into that account. The other great accomplishment, I think, especially in the legislative area, is the local content legislation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the local content legislation is something that not many countries have taken that bold step to do. Many oil producing countries, even today, still have a local content policy in place. And when Guyana, this little country now developing, started producing oil only about 4 years, a little over 4 years now, um, said that we want a local content legislation, I guess it raised a lot of eyebrows. But we were determined to ensure that we have a legislation in place. The legislation, we've said it over and over, the local content legislation was by no means meant to keep out foreign investment. It was to bring direct benefits to Guyanese and Guyanese businesses and assist Guyanese businesses to partner and to work along with foreign companies coming in with their expertise, with their resources, with their technology. And we have seen that work well over the last few years. We have seen many Guyanese businesses now being involved directly in the provision of goods and services in the oil and gas sector. Many, hundreds are involved directly, and then there are hundreds who are involved indirectly Like the farmers in Borbies, the farmers in Region 3, wherever they produce, their produce now is going offshore. Even some of the farmers may not be aware of it, but their sales have increased, the demand have increased because now we have this bigger market share. And the and I can give you one example with food, for example. The local content legislation speaks to 75% of food supply that goes offshore must be purchased in Guyana or must be produced and purchased from Guyanese and Guyanese businesses. That is just one example. Right? Of course, there's catering, there's accommodation, which is working well for Guyanese now with the
Mm-hmm.
amount of apartment buildings
Yeah.
we see putting up. Transportation, we have
Yeah.
seen that is a real success to local businesses. I've seen people move from 4 cars to 104 cars. I've seen people move from 10 cars to 110 cars. So much Guyanese and Guyanese businesses have benefited directly and indirectly from this sector because of the local content legislation. I know we have 40 carve out areas
Mm-hmm.
prioritized for Guyanese and Guyanese businesses with specific targets. But what we are pleased that we are seeing now is that many foreign companies coming to invest in Guyana now, even if they're involved in a service that is not in the Schedule 1 of the local content legislation, they're still looking to partner with local companies and local businesses.
Right.
And I think that is another plus of the local content legislation because there is always the thinking that the schedule can change. We could add services, we could increase targets, we could change targets. And that is possible because in the bill, when you were passing it, there is a clause in it that says that we can change that Schedule 1 by a simple order and a negative resolution in Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So we made it simple to change the Schedule 1, the 40 services, whether to add or whether to change targets. And I think it's a plus that now see companies, almost every foreign company that comes to invest in Guyana is looking for a local partner. And I think that is a big takeaway from the local content legislation. It has worked well. There are many companies and many people that were against it, but I think those very people are benefit from it today, and we have seen companies adopting and working well with the local businesses today too. What I'm pleased about also is that today we have almost 6,500 Guyanese working directly in the oil and gas sector, whether it's through the operator or whether it's through tier one contractors, they're employed directly in the oil and gas sector. And we are continuing to train even more. Only recently, I was in Borbies at the Guyana Technical Training College. We graduated our first batch of 24 young Guyanese who were trained at the center at Port Morant and who will be joining the crew on the Liza Unity FPSO offshore. I think they're probably already on Liza Unity offshore. 24 young Guyanese spread across the country, spread from all around the country. There's another batch of students who are training in China right now through CNOC. We have I think it's about 8 young Guyanese right now in China training. We will send another 4 next year, added to who are University of Guyana, and there are many other training courses ongoing. So that has been a priority for us too. And the companies, it's really an obligation to the companies to assist with training. It's part of the local content legislation. The training and employment is a big component of it. So we have seen an increase in training being done, whether it's on site or whether it's at the training center. We have a modern training center as well too. It's a private investment at the Luziknan Good Hope area. There's a modern training center there. A lot of people don't know about it, but there's some facilities there that is the only facility available in the Caribbean or in the region. For example, the underwater rescue operation. It is being done right here in Guyana, right at the Luziknan Training Center. So we have these things. We have a FPS, a simulation
Mm-hmm.
of an FPSO at the Port Moran Training Center. So while training, you can actually be in an environment as if you're on an FPSO. So it's hands-on training as well too. So that has really benefited many Guyanese. Imagine 6,500 Guyanese families are benefiting now directly through employment of one family member in the oil and gas sector. which was not there 5 years ago or 4 years ago.
Thank you, Minister. I want to touch quickly on your comment regarding the gas, the utilization of gas. Now, the public is well aware that the government is pursuing the gas to energy project, and you have your eyes set on a second. But how does the utilization of gas put Guyana in such a position that it has a competitive edge?
So when we said that we're going to ensure that we have better contract management or administration, and look at ways in which we can bring more benefits to Guyanese out of that contract with Exxon, this was exactly one of the way we were thinking of.
Okay.
How do we utilize and monetize the gas? And right away, we know that the biggest problem that we have faced in our country with regards to underdevelopment is the power, the generation, power generation, and the cost of electricity as well too. I know that's a nightmare for most Guyanese families. Your light
Indeed.
bill. So, and then it's not only household, but the commercial side of it, the industrial manufacturing aspect of it, because we are not manufacturing as much as we should. Right? You go to other countries. I was in Brazil recently. Almost every item you consume or you see in a store is produced in Brazil. You go to the US, the same thing. You go to India, same thing. Many countries. And that is how you truly get the benefits out of your resources and out of what you do in your country. You have to move towards downstream processing. You have to add value to your products rather than just exporting primary products. Unfortunately, we have been doing that for way too long. And the main reason behind it is the cost of electricity, the reliability of electricity. So right away, we realize that we need to utilize our gas to generate electricity because we have the gas and we have this problem with electricity. So let's work on this project. The former government did a number of their studies. There were so many studies that we were even confused with the amount of studies that we we saw from the then government. They couldn't decide on a site. It was Maikoni one time, it was Mahika, it was Ogle, it was Readinoop, it was many different sites. They couldn't decide on a site, as a matter of fact. Right away, we decided we were going to go to the Wales development area, or the Wales area, because that estate was beyond repair. It was closed down by the previous administration. It was dismantled and sold as scrap metal and all sorts of things. So we realized that the land is available there. You have access to the Demerara River, and we can take that pipeline all the way to that area. It would cost us a little more because I think it's about 15 kilometers more, but long term it will benefit the country because it's not only about establishing a power plant to provide electricity, but it's the activities around it, manufacturing, industrial activities around it. So that is why we decided we're going to go in that Wales development zone, as we call it. Um, so that project, in my view, and I've said it before, is probably the most transformational project that we will ever witness in our country. That one project will transform our country totally. Because one, we will have cheaper electricity. That's for sure. We have said it before, 50% at least reduction, and it will happen. I want to say to my fellow Guyanese, it is a project that is already in progress. It is not a project that we're speaking of now. It is not a campaign project. It is not a dream that we're selling to Guyanese. It is a project that is underway. As a matter of fact, the laying of the pipeline from the Stabroek block coming into the Crane area has started, is about 50% completed. And only recently we would have seen in the newspaper, and it's true, that the Lisa Unity and the Lisa Destiny FPSO were shut down for a few days so that that pipeline can be connected to the FPSO. It had to be shut down so that it can connect the pipeline to the FPSO to bring the gas to shore. So that was done already. So the pipeline is coming in. It will land at the Crane area. We have already identified the alignment in which it will go straight to the Wales development area. And then we already have a contract in place and work is progressing by Linseco CH4 to build that power plant at that area and also the NGL plant. We have already built the MOF, the materials offloading facility or the WAR facility has already been built. So there's the infrastructure in place already. So it's a project that has advanced a far way already. So we expect that next year, or we are working to ensure that by next year, that Guyanese can enjoy the benefit from this project. Electricity bill cut to 50%. We will have reliable electricity. I know we grew up with blackout and power outages, and we still suffer from time to time. This project will ensure we have reliable electricity, and in the whole context of climate change and cutting emission, this project will provide cleaner energy, cleaner than the use of HFO and diesel that we're doing now. So it means less emission, and then it will generate jobs. It will generate opportunities for businesses, especially in the manufacturing industrial sector. And you know the benefit of manufacturing your products locally. It simply means we save from importing, save foreign currency from importing. We save money from importing the diesel and the HFO that we're currently using right now. We don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to import products because we can manufacture it right here. An example is like fertilizer. We don't have, and fertilizer in big demand in our country, especially the expansion of the agriculture sector. It simply means that more businesses will be established. Once you produce products locally, obviously it'll be cheaper. So that is why I say that this project will transform our country for sure.
Minister, we have covered quite a few important aspects regarding Guyana's oil and gas industry. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we do hope that at some point in time in the future we can return and continue this very important conversation, because there's so many accomplishments regarding Guyana's oil and gas industry that's necessary for our citizens to know about. So, Minister, thank you so much for your time and your insights that you've provided to our viewers. We thank you as well for your time. Continue to stay tuned and following us as we bring you more insights regarding the accomplishments of the PPP government. Thank you.
Thank you.